In this module, we examine the diverse populations commonly referred to as Hispanic or Latino, and more recently, Latinx. We'll briefly examine 4 issues about this population. To begin with, about whom are we talking? We often use the terms Hispanic or Latino as if they were a race, but according to the Census Bureau, they are not. Hispanic is an ethnic or social construction, but then race is also a social construction. In the Census Bureau, people who identify as Hispanic may also identify racially as white, European, descended from Spanish colonists or others, or identifying with one of the many indigenous peoples of the Americas, or with people from Africa, Asia, or any combination of the above. And generally, they share a commonality of the Spanish language or Latin American heritage. However, some people in the U.S. who are descended from Hispanics may have never spoken Spanish or been to a Latin American country. Like many Americans, their only experiences may be that of the U.S. culture and of English, regardless of their grand and great-grandparents. While the Census Bureau does not treat Hispanic or Latino as a race, people do. When asked the Census Bureau's 2-part question, are you Hispanic? Yes, no, and with what race do you identify? 58% of Hispanics, using the census term, identify their race as white. The Pew Research Center, however, asked Latinos how they would describe their race or origin in their own words. The most common responses regarding their race in this open-ended format were Hispanic, Latino, or Latinx, 28%, with an equal number, another 28%, saying that they would link to their country or region of origin. 11% simply identify themselves as American, and only 9% identify themselves as white. The difference between 58% white and 9% white illustrates dramatically the imprecision and the artificial social construction of race. For those who do identify with a country of origin, 8 countries are the source of about 90% of the U.S. Hispanic population. By far, Mexico leads with over 37 million people. This is 6.5 times as many people as the second country, or rather territory, which is Puerto Rico. Number 3, Cuba, is less than half the number of Puerto Rico and is about the same as El Salvador. About 10 other countries, not shown on the left, are the origin for between 135,000 and 845,000 people each. To understand public policies related to Latinx populations, it is necessary to study the history of the countries of origin. The policies related to Mexico, Puerto Rico, Cuba, and other countries all differ. In this module, there is a link to a paper that summarizes the major policy actions listed on this slide related to Mexican Americans and Mexico. Mexican Americans were chosen because they are the largest Latino population. Also, it's not uncommon for people who appear to be Hispanic to be assumed to have a Mexican heritage. While some state and local policies are referenced in the material provided, non-federal policies are largely not addressed, reminding us that this work is far from complete. This is especially true for policies in the border states and their local governments, which are extensive relative to this population. Similar analysis is needed to understand the histories about the other countries of origin for the people who call the United States home today. The overall percent of the U.S. population that identifies as Hispanic or Latino in the census is almost 19% of the population, over 62 million people. The African American population is 4.5% smaller, and the Asian population 11.5% smaller. Recognizing once again, however, the issue of race and Hispanics is confusing, to say the least. At the U.S. Census Bureau website, we can see how people are distributed across the U.S. The distributions do not, however, account for the different countries of origin and different cultural heritage, so that the Hispanic culture will be different in one part of the U.S. than in another. In advance of the 2020 election, the Pew Research Center asked voters what issues were very important to them. Over 70% of Hispanics said that the economy, healthcare, and COVID were the most important in that order. Immigration was ranked number 8, but still 59% said immigration was very important. On only 2 issues were the responses of Hispanics lower than that of all U.S. residents: Supreme Court appointments and foreign policy. While not the number 1 issue, at 59%, immigration is still very important. Pew asked Latinos about their immigration priorities, and the number 1 was enabling the children brought to the U.S. to stay. Once again, note this poll does not show unanimity of thought. Only about half of respondents rate the children's ability to stay as very important. In a 2022 article in The Atlantic, Gerardo Cadava, a history professor at Northwestern University, provides a nuanced view of Hispanic political views. He writes, quote, "The conventional wisdom that Latinos are reliable members of a liberal coalition of people of color has never been exactly right. Between 1/4 and 1/3 of Latinos have voted Republican in almost every presidential election for the past half-century. Donald Trump grew his share of the Latino vote in 2020 compared to 2016, and he may be growing his share still." A November 2021 Wall Street Journal poll found that the Hispanic voters would be evenly split if Trump ran against Joe Biden in 2024. Since the economy is the number 1 policy issue among Hispanics, go to Pew's interactive chart to see how they are doing. First, a word of caution. As we have learned, Hispanic is an umbrella construct for a heterogeneous population. Pew reports that Latinos' economic conditions vary widely by origin group. Argentines have the highest median household incomes at $68,000, almost $20,000 more than the average Latino median income. Hondurans have the lowest median income at $41,000, about $8,000 below the median. Mexicans had a median income about at the Latino overall median. At Pew's interactive map, you can compare economic gaps between Hispanics and whites, between Hispanics and blacks, or Hispanics and Asians. The examples on this slide show on the left the large gap in median wealth between white families and Hispanics. On the right, we see that Hispanics, however, have a slight advantage over African American families. The public policy priorities of Latinx people are similar to those of other groups: economic opportunity, education, healthcare, voting. Marginalized groups also experience some of the same forms of discrimination and prejudice. 1/4 or more of Hispanics experience discrimination in employment, pay, housing, and interacting with the police. The same polling team found discrimination among African Americans, however, to be meaningfully higher. These polls were conducted in 2017 by NPR, Robert Wood Johnson Foundation, and the Harvard T.H. Chan School of Public Health. Our legacy of using skin color to define race and create a system of subordination is further illustrated by Latinx peoples and their wide range of skin tones. This poll distinguishes between darker and lighter colored Hispanics. In various examples of discrimination, there is a difference of 10 points or more between darker-skinned Hispanics and lighter-skinned Hispanics. We end this presentation with the first Latina on the U.S. Supreme Court, Justice Sonia Sotomayor, a New Yorker born of Puerto Rican parents. She was nominated to the court in 1991 by President Bush, served on the Court of Appeals, and then nominated by President Barack Obama to the Supreme Court in 2009. In her hearing, she was grilled about the quote shown on the slide regarding decisions by a wise Latina. A link from which that quote comes is available in the references and is worth reading. The speech made in 2002 is essentially a discourse on the importance of diversity in the courts. She said, quote, "America has a deeply confused image of itself that is in perpetual tension. We are a nation that takes pride in our ethnic diversity, recognizing its importance in shaping our society and in adding richness to its existence. Yet we simultaneously insist that we can and must function and live in a race and color-blind way that ignores these very differences that in other contexts we laud. The tension between the melting pot and the salad bowl is being hotly debated today in national discussions about affirmative action. Many of us struggle with this tension and attempt to maintain and promote our cultural and ethnic identities in a society that is often ambivalent about how to deal with its differences." The judge goes on to say, in part, that she accepts the proposition that to judge is an exercise in power and that there is no objective stance but only a series of perspectives, that there is no neutrality or escape from choice in judging. And she accepts that the experiences of women and people of color affect their decisions. She says, quote, "The aspiration to impartiality is just that, an aspiration because it denies the fact that we are, by our experiences, making different choices than others. Not all women or people of color in all or some circumstances, or indeed in any particular case of circumstance, will make that difference," she says, "but enough people of color in enough cases will make a difference in the process of judging." After making her wise Latina comment, she acknowledged that white men on the court have made wise decisions, as in the case of Brown. And she also notes that it wasn't until 1972 that a Supreme Court ever upheld the claim of a woman in a gender discrimination case. She says that people can understand issues outside of their lived experiences, but to understand takes time and effort, and that is something that not all people are willing to give. Quote, "For others," she says, "their experiences limit their ability to understand the experiences of others, and others simply do not care. Hence, one must accept the proposition," she says, "that a difference there will be by the presence of women and people of color on the bench. Personal experiences affect the facts that judges choose to see." And she says, quote, "My hope is that I will take the good from my experiences and extrapolate them further into areas with which I am unfamiliar. I simply do not know exactly what that difference will be in my judging, but I accept that there will be some based on my gender and my Latina heritage."